So we began this series a few weeks back after a very divisive time in our country with the election, and we are about to wrap up the series today just before, if not more divisive moment that our community is going to have to navigate together in the next week, when these two teams meet for the first time in 13 years. Yes. As a UT alum myself, and somebody who contributes to the obsessive amounts of comments about UT football from the stage, I just feel like there's a lot on the line for me. And so I'm feeling a little nervous about it, to be honest. And I went to UT actually in 2012, and this was the first year that they didn't play that game together. And so just during my time at UT, they would replay Justin Tucker's winning field goal at every single game, regardless of how awful we were at the time, every single time. But and my family and I, we actually went to go take some pictures this weekend, and we have a bunch of Aggie friends, and so we got together to take pictures of each other's families for Christmas cards and all that stuff. And so, I've trained my kids in the good things to do in photos, so Grayson holds up a hook'em, and then right behind me, while I'm taking the picture, one of our friends is like, no, gig 'em. And so this is what he ended up doing. So I've got a lot of parenting work to do. He's in progress. He's got some time still, luckily. But you can say with all my Aggie friends, there's a lack of peace in my future with this game that is coming. And we began this series called Peace in the Pieces just a few weeks back, not talking about peace between football teams or peace in the world even, but more so an internal peace that we all long for and that we all desire. That it looks differently for each of us because we're wired differently, but it's that sense of happiness, or joy, or security, or contentment, or just goodness in life, those moments we can breathe deeply. That's the peace that we hope for in our life. And it looks different for each of us, but we all contain these pieces of our life that, right, wrong, or indifferent, have a tendency to pull us away from the internal peace we actually most desire. And so we started to ask this question: how do we find peace in the pieces of life? Knowing that there are these pieces that can tend to pull us away. And the irony in this whole series is what we said in part one, kind of the bottom line for this whole series, is just that peace isn't something you can find, but it's someone you can know in Jesus. That if he is who he claimed to be, that he actually offers us a peace that transcends all understanding, no matter what is going on in our life. He offers us to it, and we can have that peace in our life, that fullness of life. And so we talked about what it looks like to cast our anxieties on him, to invite him into our life if we're looking to do that. We talked about what it means to tune into the volume of God in our life, to listen to his voice, to think about what we think about so that we can hear the voice of God in our life. And today as we wrap it up, what we're going to do is we're going to look at those moments in life, or those seasons, or those pieces of our life where it is perhaps the most difficult to tune in to the peace that God offers us. I just want a quick caveat here too. I'm getting over a little bit of a cold right now, so if I cough at any point in this message, I just want to apologize ahead of time. Like that right there. I could feel it coming on, so I just thought I should let you guys know. A quick show of hands in here to get us going. Raise your hand if you are a thunderstorm person. Yeah, like if you know you like thunderstorms, you raise your hand, you love thunderstorms. Yeah, thunderstorms bring weird things out of me. It makes me want to do one, sit at a coffee shop and just work for hours, like on my laptop, just get in that deep work mode. It also makes me want to go on runs, like just go out in the rain and just get pelted. I know, I'm a broken person. And then it also makes me want to sit and watch an old movie, like an 80s movie with my wife with the door open, listening to the thunder. We love thunderstorms. We like thunderstorms so much as they don't become life or property threatening. I mean, this is kind of common sense, right? And there was one a couple years back that happened to us where, we had just moved into our first house. We were excited to explore this area, and we weren't really checking the weather. We knew some rain was coming in, but we pull out onto the highway to go out to dinner to go on a date. And we turn and we kind of face north, and there is this black death cloud that is just like visibly coming towards us on the horizon. All these other cars are like flying by on the other side of the highway. As soon as we turn out on the highway, our phones start going off with a weather alert saying, take shelter now, that like it's a tornado warning and hail and all that stuff. So we feel really silly. We weren't paying attention to the news. We flip around and we go put both cars in the driveway, and we have like our dogs and mattresses in the laundry room in the middle middle of our house. We have David Yowmans and Jim Spencer just blasting in the living room. David Yowmans, God rest his soul, right? He didn't die. He just moved away. Now we have Jim Spencer back. But if you're a KXAM person, you know. That was a tangent right there if you've ever heard one. But I don't envy weathermen at all, because what ended up happening is we're like taking shelter now, and then we got like 5 minutes of rain. That's all that happened, right? But for that moment, I was not a thunderstorm person. And I share that because no matter how at peace in life we can be, no matter how good things are going sometimes, no matter how things are firing on all cylinders, there are just moments where the storms of life can hit. And they can pull us away from the peace that we most deeply desire. And we can discipline ourselves. We can be prepared financially. I mean, we can have all of our relationships lined up, but we cannot control what the future holds. We can't control what the economy will do. We can't control what our kids will do, what our spouses will do, what our bosses will do, what their bosses will do. We can't control what happens medically at some point in our life. And we can be wise, and we can prepare, and we can prevent, and we can tune into God's voice in our life. And we can be thinking about the right things and casting our anxieties on God, but eventually the storms of life will hit. And we might say it this way, and if you're old enough, then you just know this to be true. Eventually, we all know that life happens. Life happens. And if you're in here and you would say, man, everything is up and to the right now, things are going great, things are good, I just want to say I'm so happy that's the case for you. I still think today's topic is relevant for you, though, because if you live long enough, you know that it is not an if, but it is a when life happens to all of us. And judging by all the nods in the crowd right now, I can tell that many of you would agree with that. And so it might not be something you apply now, but maybe you pocket this for some other time in the future. But then there are those of you in this room right now and tuning in online that you are right in the thick of it. Just based on conversations that I have week after week after week, I mean, it's interesting. We come into church, the music feels good, we all smile, things are great. But man, based on conversations that I have with individuals, there are so many of us right in the thick of it, in the storms of life, where life is happening. Maybe for some of you, you recently had a circumstance that uprooted you and everything that you know and everyone you know to a new place, and you feel lost and alone because of it, and it was completely out of your control. Maybe some of you are lost with your kids and your relationship with them, and you don't know what to do. Perhaps some of you have a relationship in your family dynamic that is blown up or continues to blow up, and with Thanksgiving coming this week, you're not super stoked about having to deal with all of that. Some of you in here just lost a job. Like in the last week, some of you just lost a job and you're not sure what to do. Some of you are sitting next to your spouse and you are wondering if divorce is in your near future. Some of you in here have lost a loved one perhaps, maybe recently or maybe within the last few years, but you're still very much so in that grieving process. If you find yourself in that category, I just want to pause for a second and just acknowledge a couple of things. One, you might feel like peace feels so far away from you right now. And for some of you in there, if that's you, I just want to say I am so sorry that you find yourself here today relating with this conversation, because it is a heavy conversation. And the other thing I want you to know is that today is most likely not going to be very emotionally satisfying. There are things that happen in life that we kind of wake up and we go through our days and we hope that there are words or there are answers that can alleviate the emotional weight that we might carry. But there is nothing I could say in this little pocket of time that we have together where you could walk out of here and that you could feel completely different and completely better, because sometimes there just are no words. And so today might not even be emotionally satisfying. It might be the opposite of that, because it actually brings to the surface some of the things that you've been keeping at bay, perhaps. But it is a worthwhile discussion, because the storms of life are going to happen. And they have a tendency to rob our peace. But I do believe that there is good in the midst of it. I do believe that perhaps if you find yourself here and life is happening, that God has you here for a reason. And I do believe that peace is possible as well. And so today we're not going to ask just, how do we find peace in the pieces of life? we're going to ask, how do we find peace in the storms of life? Not just day to day to day, but when life happens, where is peace in that? And if peace isn't something you can find, but it's someone you can know, well, then where is he in the midst of it? Those moments where we go, God, are you even still there? Where is God when life tends to happen? There's a story in the New Testament Gospels I want to look at together. It answers this question both literally and figuratively. And we're going to jump right into it. This is right in the middle of Jesus' ministry, and this is written by the gospel writer John Mark. And here's what it says. It says, as evening came, Jesus says to his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind. There was a lot that had been happening up until this point, a big day with lots of speaking and interacting with people. So they're ready to get away and rest and rejuvenate. And then that's not what happens. Look at what he writes next. But soon, a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. So they try to get away, and that's not really what happens. Instead, the storm kind of hits them right in the midst of, at the end of a very particularly bad day. And what the gospel writer writes next is one of the reasons why I personally believe that these gospel accounts are not made up, but they actually talk about real life events that happen, because there are random details that we come across that many historians and people would just attribute to the randomness of life that happens in all of our life. And that's what we read next, because this is what John Mark writes next. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I find it hard to sleep at times, even when all the circumstances are good. My wife, on the other hand, this is what happens when you marry somebody. You marry somebody opposite you, right? My wife, on the other hand, she can sleep anywhere at any time, regardless of how loud it is, no matter what is going on. Raise your hand if you're one of those people. Yeah, you can sleep anywhere. Like right now, you're like, I'm thinking about just sleeping, depending on how this goes, right? Let's see if this guy keeps talking. Yeah, I envy you. I wish I was like you. And because of this detail in here, I think that Jesus is probably just like you. Because the boat is literally taking on water, and he's in the back of the boat, passed out with a neck pillow on, with a cushion on. And this is just the humanity of Jesus here, right? I mean, if you've ever done public speaking or interacting with people in the way that Jesus did, I mean, there's this mental, physical exhaustion that comes with it. And so, of course, he is just wiped out. He gets in the boat, he passes out, the storm starts to build, and of course, the disciples are going, oh, this is not good, right? And so they end up going to Jesus. It says the disciples woke him, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown? Don't you see what is happening right here?" And while we can't relate with being with Jesus in a boat in this scenario, and you can kind of see the storm that is happening with them around them, what we can relate with is that there are moments when things are going really good. Maybe you're a Jesus follower and you come into church and it feels so good and all of this, or maybe you're not a Jesus follower or somewhere in between, you're exploring, but life is great, it's up and to the right and things are going good, but eventually life happens and a circumstance hits. Something unexpected occurs, right? And maybe you find yourself, just like the disciples here, looking up in the sky at night and looking up and asking God, don't you care? Don't you love me? Aren't you supposed to be a good, perfect father? Or maybe even a layer further, you ask a question like, God, are you even there to begin with? I know for me personally, it's not exactly these two kind of questions, but there have been things that have transpired in my life where I've gotten a piece of news or a certain relationship has blown up, and I've just found myself not necessarily saying these, but saying, God, are you still good? Because there have been things that have happened where I just go, okay, if you say that you're good and that following you should lead to good things in my life, well, this doesn't seem very good, God. And I wish we could look at our pain and our struggles in life the way that we can see the disciples here, because we're not in it, right? I mean, they're in this storm, but we know the end of the story. There's a life, death, and resurrection, proof he was who he claimed to be. So we're like, yeah, it's a scary storm, there's some rain, but you've got God in the boat with you, like you're gonna be fine, right? But we don't see our own stories that way, and that's not how they see their story, and it's why they're calling out and they're saying, Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown? And they are projecting onto God the things that they are experiencing circumstantially in their life. Teacher, don't you care? And we tend to do the exact same thing when life happens in the storm. Say it. We tend to come to conclusions about God based on circumstances in life, where we project onto God what is going on in our world. And don't hear me wrong here, that experiences and circumstances should inform our worldview. But what we can tend to do is go, okay, if this storm is happening, well, that must mean you don't care or you're not there. And in a culture where we are primarily pulled towards maximizing happiness and comfort, what can inadvertently happen is we adopt a worldview that says anything that doesn't lead to my happiness or comfort, well, that must be wrong or that must not be true. And the fallacy in that line of thinking is that our circumstances don't change what is true about reality. For instance, bad things in the world do not mean that God does not exist. They don't mean that God does not exist. What doesn't exist, because we know that bad things happen, what doesn't exist is a God who wouldn't allow bad things to happen. Now, there's a lot of rabbit trails that we could go down with this, and we don't have time to do that today, but the big idea, the main point that we get hung up on here is we change our perspective of God based on what is going on in our life. But the big idea here is that God does not change based on our circumstances. Our feelings towards him can, our perception of him will. There might be times when we want to scream at God or say, God, this makes no sense at all if you are a loving, good, perfect God. But our perspective of him, our thoughts about him don't change who he is. And that is actually a good thing. That is a good thing. That is good news. And this is that part where I said this is not emotionally satisfying at all. But isn't it true that in the midst of the storms of life, that we want to yearn for something that gives us handles, that we want an anchor to hold us down, something to give us peace. We want something to be unchanging that we can go to. God does not change based on our circumstances. And the disciples discover this next, going back to the story. When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. So the disciples had begun to change what they thought about Jesus because of the storm. Jesus instantly says, no, the storm didn't change anything about me. It just changed what you thought to be true about me. He demonstrates who he is right there in that moment. Then he asks them, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And notice how Jesus could have addressed the storm. He could have said, hey, that storm was a big deal, but don't worry, guys, it's okay. But instead, he goes right to the matter of their faith. He says this is a matter of faith, and there is a lesson for them in this that is true in our life as well. And it's that God's apparent silence is not absence. When it feels as though God is in the back of the boat with a neck pillow sleeping as you are going through something significant in life, he is not absent. He is not silent. And we know this, not because we put our head in the sand to make ourselves feel better. We know this and are secure in it because of Christ. A couple years later, after they have this occurrence in the boat, the disciples are talking with Jesus, and it's towards the end of his ministry. And he kind of brings it back to this moment in the boat, and he kind of ties these two ideas together, and he gives them this kind of concluding thoughts. He's about to be arrested and crucified, and so he's kind of like, hey, I'm going to just unload for you guys a lot of these really important points that I want to make sure you don't forget. And he says this to them. He says, I've told you these things so that you won't abandon your faith. Meaning, there will be moments, there will be times when you want to abandon your faith. And I'm telling you this so you are aware of that, so you know what to expect, which is not very good news. And he continues to tell his guys, he says, for you will be expelled from the synagogues, and the time is coming when those who kill you, wait, what, Jesus? Those who kill you will think they are doing a holy service for God. This is because they have never known the Father or me. Yes, I'm telling you these things now so that when they happen, not if, talking to his two disciples here, when they happen, you will remember my warning. this is probably not the verse that we all have hanging on our bathroom mirror to motivate us when we wake up in the morning every day, right? Jesus is telling the disciples here, your deepest fears are most likely going to happen. He tells them, I've calmed the storm for you once. That doesn't calm what is going to come in the future. If we put ourselves in the shoes of the disciples listening, I would imagine we start to go, whoa, Jesus, what's your big point here with this? He says, I've told you all of this so that, and this is so wild, this is so counterintuitive. After what he just said, I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. What? Peace in me. When I read passages like this, because there's lots of these verses throughout the Bible, and when I read verses like this, I always go back to thinking about Harry Potter in The Prisoner of Azkaban, this scene with Ron Weasley where he predicts Harry's future, he doesn't know what he's doing, and he has this moment where he looks at them and he says, you're going to suffer, but you're going to be happy about it. My wife is probably like, why did he do the accent? Like, why did he try that? Yeah, she would say she's sweating right now. That's what she says. But it's these moments where we read what Jesus said here, and we feel towards what Jesus said about how Ron's face looks in this picture. Like, that doesn't make any sense. This is what's going to happen, and we're going to have peace. Jesus, how does that add up at all? And it's almost like Jesus can read our thoughts, and he reads the thoughts of the disciples, because he ends this little this paragraph, this whole thing that he's explaining to his guys. He ends it this way, and he says, "In this world, you will have trouble. This world is broken and flawed, full of broken and fundamentally flawed and sinful people. In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart." Take heart. That phrase, take heart, means to reach out and grab on to courage, to reach out and hold on to something hopeful. This is to tune into God's voice in your life, that you can take heart and reach out to something good, that it is not in vain. It might feel like as though God is absent or silent, but he's not. You can take heart. Why, Jesus? Why would we take heart? Because I have overcome the world. See, when we have these moments in life where we cry out and say, God, don't you care? What's beneath the surface of that is another question, because there's often a question beneath the question beneath the question. And it's a question of us saying, God, I wish you would do something about this. Or God, I wish you would have done something about this. When Jesus says, take heart, you can take heart because I've overcome the world, what he's saying is God does care, and God has done something about it. And it all culminated in a moment in history when Jesus hung on a Roman cross. And this was the moment that God chose to do something about all of it. And I want to pause here because this is one of those messages that's really difficult to figure out how to help it land in all the different places we might be in our faith. Because for some of you in here, if you're a Jesus follower, we just hope to share things here on Sunday that are encouraging and inspiring for you and your relationship with God. And then for those of you who are not Jesus followers, and maybe you're exploring or asking questions, there are still principles that Jesus gives us that are applicable to our life, makes our life better, and we also want to share things in such a way that you can explore your faith. But when it comes to the storms of life, I think this is why Jesus kept bringing it back to a matter of the disciples' faith. When it comes to the storms of life, I don't know where you go without faith. If this is all meaningless and we are all deceived and there is no God, then we can manufacture meaning in the storms of life, but we cannot substantiate it in truth or reality, because it means that we are all just piles of matter coming and going in the universe, and none of it really matters. This is why we say one of the most significant questions you can ask in your life is, who is Jesus to you? Because the downstream implications of how you answer that question change everything about how you see yourself, about how you see the world, about how you see God, about how you see purpose and meaning. Because if Jesus is who he claimed to be, then the moment that he hung on a Roman cross, a perfect, undeserving punishment, a life took the penalty of sin for us to reconcile us back to God, that was the moment where God chose to do something about all of it, where he said it's not meaningless, he's not absent, he's not silent, that he loves us immensely more than we can possibly know. And not only this, but the cross paves the way, not just for a reconciliation of relationship with God in this life, but also in the life to come, in heaven and eternity one day. Many people ask the question about bad things and suffering, and they say something like, well, if I was God, I would just create a world where everything is perfectly good. That's understandable, right? And there's a whole thing about not knowing good without knowing bad and all of that, but what you have to know is God has created that world. It is just not this one. It is through relationship with him that we are offered eternity in heaven one day, complete goodness, perfect goodness in the life to come. Jesus' message to us and his guys in these interactions, you can boil it down to this. God's apparent silence is not absence, and his apparent absence is not apathy. He has done something about it in this life and the life to come. And because God doesn't change, that means that can never be taken away from us. And you are invited in the midst of life happening, in the midst of the storms you might be facing, you are invited to take heart, to lean into him, to cast your anxieties on him, to tune into his voice in your life, a voice that will never leave you and never forsake you. This is one of those conversations where we could kind of bounce between the intellectual and the experiential, the head and the heart, but I think there's pieces of this that need to be known and experienced at a heart level, and stories help us do that. And there's a specific story in my own journey, my own life, that I just want to share with you that's helped me understand this more than any other time. And it is with my small group leader from Inside Out in high school, Jeff Brown. This is me, Jeff, and Jordan at one point doing a podcast. And Jeff is just an incredible human being. And I've known him for a long time. And where his story took a turn is actually with his son, Garrett. I was on the wrestling team with Garrett in high school, and I remember one specific day, I went into a wrestling period, and it was one of those freebies where you just get to hang out and have fun and do whatever you want. And so a bunch of guys, open mats, so we're like, let's do flips. Let's learn how to do backflips. That makes a lot of sense, right? And so that's what we start to do. We're doing flips and stuff, and I'm hanging out with Garrett, and I specifically remember about 15 minutes of this day where him and I are just kind of in the corner together. We are cracking up, having such a good time, just falling on the ground. And then the period ended, and about 4 or 5 hours go by, and I get in the car with my wife, girlfriend at the time, and we drive to her house, and we park, and we're walking into her house, and her mom comes out, and her mom's in tears as she's walking out, and she tells us that Garrett had taken his own life. And I remember just being in shock, because I was just hanging out with him earlier that day. And this was the first time I'd been this close to anything like this in my life. And there were layers of it for me to process. Just losing my friend, losing somebody I'd been close to. Where's God in all of that? And then also processing the layer of watching Jeff go through the loss of his son. And understandably so, it was the end of our senior year. We just thought, man, it's completely understandable if he just checks out. He's got a lot he's got to navigate and grieve and process. And he was gone for about a month. And then about a month after Garrett's passing, he shows up in group. And we're all just flabbergasted that he's there. How in the world are you there right now? And he just gives us a space to process and ask him questions. And we're all sitting there with him, and we're talking, and we're asking him how he's doing. And I always remember him kind of phrasing it this way. He says that it wasn't like a new layer of pain that he discovered. It was like that word didn't do it justice, like it was an entirely new category of suffering that he did not know existed in the world. And he's telling us all this, and we're just going, man, well, how in the world are you here? And he just brought it all back to and attributed it all to his faith in Christ. It was just rooted in his faith in Christ. And a couple years ago, we did a video interview with him, and we asked him about this, and 10 years later, how he's still processing and thinking on it. And I just want to share with you what he said, because it captures it. I just want to read a couple quotes from the interview. Here's what Jeff said. "The only thing that helps is knowing there is a picture and a story bigger than what I can even imagine or fathom, And that whether I'll be able to understand it on the other side of heaven or not, from God's perspective, it makes sense. That's the only thing that can give me some peace. I just can't understand this, but God does, and God is good. He continues. What gives me confidence that God can work good from suffering is Christ. And while I admitted that as a father, I would not have sacrificed my son if given the choice. God did that with Christ. Because of that sacrifice, we have salvation. We can have eternity in heaven with God. And that brings the ultimate good from the ultimate suffering, the ultimate evil, which is the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And then he ended it saying this. I'm weaker because of this. It's still very hard 10 years later, and I don't feel I have the emotional capacity as I had before. I'm not as strong as I was before as a person. This event helped me to see my weakness. It didn't make me stronger. But it has made my faith immensely stronger for that very reason. Because I see my weakness, my lack of strength, and I have nothing to turn to but God. My faith is strengthened because of my weakness. It forever impacted my own following of Jesus, how I saw God, how I navigated my own storms of life that I would walk through. We've been saying throughout this series that peace isn't something you can find, it's someone you can know. And the point that I'm trying to make today is that no matter what goes on in your life, and no matter how much you want to push back on God, you always have someone to go to. An unchanging anchor of peace, no matter the storm in life you might find yourself in. Now, earlier today, I said that we would find ourselves in different categories. And for some of you in here, your life is up and to the right and things are going great, and I'm happy for you. I think that's amazing. But like we said earlier, it is a matter of when, not if, but when life happens. And when that does happen, there's just one thing I want to challenge you with right now today that perhaps can help you hold on to this when life happens. And it's this. Practice hearing the voice of God in the calm so you have the ability to hear him in the storm. This is to go back to what we said in part 2 of this series. To practice, to lean into, to learn what it looks like to hear God's voice in you now, in the calm, when things aren't crazy, when things are at peace. So when they are crazy, you have a storehouse of relational deposits that you have built with the Prince of Peace so that when things are crazy, you know that you can stand on secure and go back to him over and over again. But it is making a habit. It is practicing now, hearing the voice of God in the calm so you can hear it in the storm. And then for those of you in here that you find yourself in the midst of a storm and life is happening, I know you might not believe me when I say that God is still good. I know you might not trust me when I say that peace is possible. There's one thing I want you to just hold on to in the midst of this, one thing I want you to say, and it is that I always have someone to go to. It's all I want you to hold on to today, is I always have someone to go to, rooted not in putting our head in the sand, but rooted in the cross of Jesus and the fact that it established that God never changes. And I want you to practice actually saying this out loud, because you might need to hear yourself say this out loud. So on the count of 3, I just want to say this together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I always have someone to go to. We're not promised an easy life. We're promised a life of refinement and process and growth. And there might be things that do not make you stronger, but perhaps allow you to lean on the strength of your good heavenly Father who loves you far more than you know. And it's by going back to him, knowing you always have someone to go to. We're going to wrap up our time together, and I just want to give you a moment to process and sit and be with this. Maybe life is just crazy, and you need a moment to breathe. Maybe you're right in the thick of it. You don't know what tomorrow holds, and you haven't given yourself the space to just breathe peace into your life. The Prince of Peace offers you fullness of life, fullness of peace right where you are, just as you are. He never changes. He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. loves you more than you know. And so Emily is going to sing a song over you, and I just want you to take this moment to process, to be with God, to be with the very presence of peace in your life.
I found peace in the river. I found peace by quiet stream. I found peace on the mountain. I found peace in fields of green. Found peace in the desert. I found peace in raging waves. Found peace in the valley. Ooh, I found peace in what you say. And I can finally breathe again. I can finally breathe again. I found peace in the chaos. I found peace in suffering. I found peace in confusion. I found peace inside of me. And I can finally breathe again. And I can finally breathe again. I found you in the river. I found you in suffering. I found you on the mountain. You were always around me. Finally breathe again.
Would you just pray with me? Heavenly Father, you see it all. And there are questions that we have that we know you're big enough to address, and that maybe on this side of heaven we're just not going to get the answers to. But God, you are still good, and we know this because of Jesus and that moment he hung on a cross for us. Would you allow that truth to emanate in our lives and give us the ability just to breathe peace into our life? God, we thank you. We give it all to you and lay it at your feet. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thank you so much for being here. We will see you next week as we kick off a Christmas series.